Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for this week's podcast episode. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined with Drew Smith. He is the CEO of Attributa, which is a marketing attribution consulting firm that is built for organizations that want to improve their marketing, reporting, data, and analysis. And today, we're going to talk about all things attribution, just like B2B marketers and demand gen marketers love. So, Drew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
So excited. Do you want to get started with just a little bit of like your background, like why you love attribution and what got you started into starting Attributa?
Yeah, absolutely. Why I love attribution actually goes back years and years and years. We're talking like mid 2000s when none of this technology existed. And at the time, I was working for a company and I had two main things that I worked on. And one of them was managing corporate events, which was over 100 trade shows a year. We would do client appreciation events and road shows and things of that nature. And then I also managed we had sports partnerships. So we were partners with the Arizona Cardinals, which is why you see these footballs behind me. And we had all this stuff that went along with the partnership. Like we got tickets to games and we got helmets and footballs and jerseys and stuff like this. And we would send them out to prospects and clients. And, I remember that at the time, so I had actually started with this company in sales. I did sales for this company for 3.5 years. Then I moved over to the dark side and went and worked in marketing, where I just got to spend all the money instead of making money. And so I remember thinking to myself, like, at that time, God, I wonder, like, how much, like, is this even like driving sales? Is this even driving business and revenue? I have no way to tell because, like, these advanced systems that we have nowadays didn't exist. And so I was always very frustrated that I couldn't turn any of those efforts into like a measurable, qualitative, quantitative analysis of the business impact that all these efforts were having. I was working my ass off doing all this stuff. I just couldn't tell what the impact was. And so that's like mid to late 2000s. Fast forward to 2016, 2017. So like end of 2016, early 2017. And I was working with a client at a different agency. I was at a different agency working with a client that was trying to get into multi-touch attribution. And at the time, we offered this like custom solution that we offered to clients to do multi-touch attribution. And we did a demo of Visible. And when I saw the demo of Visible, this is pre-Marketo and Adobe acquisition, so it was still called Visible. So I can use the term. I did the demo of Visible. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I was looking for back in 2007 when I had all this stuff going on and couldn't measure it. This is exactly what I was looking for, is this tool. And so, and I just happened to have a client that was going down this multi-touch attribution path. So I was like, hey, like, client, you need this tool. I need to learn how to play with this tool because like this seems like a really fun toy to play with. And so the stars aligned and the client ended up buying the tool. And then I got to just like implement and manage the tool. And just ultimately, fell in love with Visible as a platform, fell in love with marketing attribution as a strategy and concept. And then from there, I just basically became like the attribution guy in that agency, went to another agency and was still the attribution guy, and decided like, hey, instead of being the attribution guy for other agencies, why don't we create a whole company around attribution? Because most other organizations that do attribution, it's like one person, and attribution is maybe 25% of what they work on. And it's very difficult to become an expert in something when you only spend 25% of your time actually doing that thing. So I said, hey, let's start a company where we can actually build some real expertise, because this is the thing that we're going to focus on. So that's kind of like my journey with attribution, and all the way up to starting Attributa and hopefully turning this into a company that is just, the premier attribution experts.
I love that. And I think one of the key things that set me me apart from learning about you and your business when I was first discovering you is the fact that you had released a blog article talking about how there definitely is a way to measure podcasts. And in today's digital, dark social era, unattributed world, right? Quote unquote, unattributed world, that was almost like groundbreaking. So do you want to share some more light on like the hot take tips for, hey, you can actually measure a podcast, and can you share those insights right here and right now?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, measuring podcast performance using attribution is not easy to do. It's very easy to understand why people have said that it's not possible for so long, because it's not super easy. It's not super apparent how to do it. So it does take work. But if you follow the steps that are in that article, and we'll talk about those now, you can fill a lot of those gaps. So let's talk about the first big piece of this. And that is kind of actually going back to marketing 101. When you run a podcast, what is the primary CTA for every podcast host that exists out there? Subscribe and follow.
Download, yeah, subscribe
and follow, right? And that's great. We want people to subscribe and follow to the podcast. But we also want people to, on this podcast, as a guest on a podcast, I don't have my own podcast, but I guest on podcasts from time to time. As a guest on the podcast, yes, I want people to like and subscribe and follow your podcast. That's great. Fantastic. I also want people to come to Attributa.com. Now, if I'm going to do this properly and use marketing 101 concepts, I'm going to say something like, hey, if you go to Attributa.com and you mention code podcast, or if you mention code Janelle, or you put in a promo code, or you go to this specific Attributa.com/Janelle, or the name of the podcast, I'm going to give you a special offer. I'm going to give you a free Attributa t-shirt, or a 30-minute consulting session, or I'm going to give you something, give you an offer that incentivizes you to come to my website, right? And because I've given you a code or a vanity URL to go to, it becomes trackable, right? So number one, that's the first step. That's the easy step to tracking podcast performance, whether you're a host, because you could do that for your own podcast, right? You could have an offer and a vanity URL or a promo code or something that somebody could use. Very easy to implement that, and it's very trackable. So that's number one, and that's the easy thing. That's just going back to marketing 101. Have an offer and then track the offer. Easy, right? So that's number one. Now, number two, not everybody's going to do that. Some people are going to just say, well, I don't want to use vanity URLs. I don't want to use promo codes. I'm just going to go to the website on my own. And then if I fill out a form, then I fill out a form. And this is where actually, which is why I've always said that software-based attribution and self-reported attribution aren't in conflict with one another. They actually work well together. So for the folks that decide they don't want to be tracked with a vanity URL or a promo code, and they just want to go to the website and fill out the form, that's where you put a self-reported attribution thing on that says, where did you hear about us, right? And then that person might say something like podcast. And now I have a thing in there so that when the software-based attribution says that they came direct or through organic search, I now have the self-reported attribution that adds the context to that of, oh, you heard about us from a podcast. Now, there's also the people that either may not remember that they heard about us from a podcast, or that may just not like doing self-reported attribution, and they just put other because they don't want you to know. And you get on a phone call with them. And what's the first thing that a sales rep asks when you talk to almost every sales rep directly in a non-B2B world?
How did you hear about us?
Yeah, how did you hear about us? If your SDRs, BDRs, and or sales reps are not asking that question, again, this is marketing 101. If they're not asking that question, you are missing the boat, quite literally, because you have the ability to ask that question. You have the ability to record that in your CRM as you're having the conversation with that prospect. And you can use that again in software-based attribution to understand where somebody came from. So those three things are really the key ways that you use a software-based attribution platform to track the influence of podcasts. Now, there's certainly the blog article goes way more in depth and in detail. I don't want to take the entire episode here to do that. But that's going to cover, probably one of those three mechanisms is going to cover probably 95% of the folks that are going to engage with you from hearing from you on a podcast. Sure, there might be 5% that's missing there, but it's probably going to capture about 95% of them.
So you go back and you say marketing 101, and it's really this easy and you need to go back to the basics. Yet so many B2B companies struggle and fail and are constantly getting asked, how do we measure? How do we do this? And attribution is broken. And they're like, oh, we have Visible, but it doesn't work. Or, oh, we have Tableau, but we don't understand it. Why do you think that in your eyes, when you say attribution is so easy, like it's marketing 101, where's the disconnect with your level of knowledge and other B2B organizations where they just can't get a hand on attribution?
I think one of the big disconnects is, and I'm going to say this, and I don't say this to talk ill of anybody in any way, shape, or form, but I think one of the biggest problems is that you have a lot of folks. I know tons of folks that got into marketing through creative endeavors. So they come from the world of design, or they come from the world of copywriting, or they come from the world of video or something like that. And a lot of the folks that go into those creative disciplines, as we all know, not everybody's good at everything, right? Or is interested in everything. And people that get into those creative disciplines, I hear a lot of folks that go into those creative disciplines because, like, I don't like math and I don't like data. And then they end up in marketing and we put them in charge of attribution. And as people that, one, don't have the interest, and two, don't have the experience and expertise, and in some cases may not have the aptitude, right? Their brains may not be wired for that. And so you put it in the hands of people that just aren't the people that are equipped to be experts in that. And so if you don't have, and marketing organizations criminally under-resource the analyst function in the organization. Most marketing organizations I work with don't have a dedicated marketing analyst. They have an operations professional that's good at software, like Marketo or HubSpot or something like that, and they put them in the role of an analyst. And I would say that they're probably better suited than somebody who comes from, I'm a copywriter or I'm a graphic designer, but are they an analyst? No, they're not. I mean, statistical analysis and data requires a slightly different skill set than just being able to be really good at Marketo or HubSpot, right? I mean, how many marketers do you know that can tell you the difference between median, mean, and mode?
I'm not even sure that I could.
Right. But those three concepts are some of the basic statistical analysis concepts. That's not even getting into data science. That's basic statistics.
Yeah.
Again, most marketers haven't had to think about that since you took a statistics class back in high school, right?
Yeah.
Or had like a month of statistics in high school. And so if you haven't had to think of a month of statistics since high school, of course you're not going to be good at attribution. Like that's not an indictment of you as a person. It's just like you haven't had to deal with this stuff. So why would you be good at it if you haven't thought of it in 10, 15, 20 years?
That's a really interesting take. I love that you bring that up of like, not everybody should be good at things. Like we have to recognize our strengths and our weaknesses. And I think it's really valuable to call that out. Like if your background isn't in that, nor is it your passion, like you shouldn't be forced into those roles. And I think that's a really critical component that you called out with some of the marketers today of they're just stumbled into these different roles. And I think it's also really cool how you called out about having a specific like analyst role, because I've seen it as well where RevOps or operations get rolled in and all of a sudden they're doing like forecasting models. And they're trying to figure out how to understand if we invest X amount more and all the way up into the different variations of the scenarios. And I've seen that the individuals in those roles struggle, because to your point, they're specifically knowledgeable in the systems and the operations of those systems. Do you think that the next step for companies to be able to really get a hand on attribution is to hire analysts in-house, or to partner with individuals like yourself that's, outsourcing? And that might be like a selfish question on your end, and say like, oh, everybody needs to come work with me. But like, truthfully, when we talk about like what's broken in B2B marketing, is it because companies aren't staffing the analyst role? Or do you really think like it's not necessarily something you need in-house, and it's easily something that they could outsource to you, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a little bit of both. Because you need to have, I'm always a proponent for organizations, even the organizations that work with me. My end goal is to empower organizations so that they don't have to work with me ever again, right? I want them to be perfectly successful with the strategies and the tools that we've implemented, and they don't need to work with me. I want them to want to work with me, but I don't want them to need to work with me. The best organizations, the organizations that do this the best, they have in-house analysts and they have consultants that they work with, because in-house analysts are great, and they build this wonderful just history of data and knowledge of what's been going on in this company's environment over years, right? And they have this fantastic just knowledge and intellectual property that the company owns within the organization. But it's very difficult for individual contributors and inside folks to learn from what's going on outside of the organization, unless they're part of some sort of community. Like, we've got the MoPros community that people are part of. There's no marketing attribution community yet. But there's if you're an internal person, you don't get to be able to see what other companies are doing really well. So having a consultant, I can go see a dashboard that a client builds that I'm like, ooh, I love that dashboard. And then I can go bring that dashboard over to my next client. That doesn't work if you only have an internal analyst. They don't get to do that. Or it's more difficult for them to be able to do that. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a yes and. I think it's both. And most organizations don't even have one of those two. And so, you're going to struggle being good at attribution and analysis if you don't have either. So the first step for organizations is to get one or the other. Either have an internal analyst or get a consultant. And then ultimately, long-term, you should have both in place.
Super valuable insights. Thank you. The next question, we're going to dig deeper into actual attribution a little bit more. When you first did your intro, you were talking about how you fell in love with Visible and some of the multi-channel, multi-touch attribution models. A big question that demand gen marketers have today as well is, which model should I be working with? What is the right one for us to deploy? And I know you also have some really interesting thoughts here as well. So do you want to share those?
Yes, absolutely. So first off, there is no attribution model that an organization should adopt as their model. It doesn't work that way. And I think this is also one of the big blockers that most organizations have when they want to get on attribution, is they don't jump in because they're trying to pick a model, and you shouldn't pick a model. And one of these days I'm going to have one of these as like a prop. But attribution models, I view attribution models as like tools, and specifically like a set of wrenches. So I wish I had a set of wrenches right now. I should have been prepared. I have a set of wrenches. It's just not with me right now, but
yeah, pause, run, go get them. No, just kidding.
I mean, I will. But like, you go buy a set of wrenches and you get 6 wrenches in the set, and each wrench is a different size, and it's designed to fit a different bolt or nut or whatever you have, but it's designed for a specific purpose, to fit a specific use case. Attribution models are the same way. When you buy an attribution platform, you get a series of out-of-the-box attribution models, and they're designed to be used for specific use cases. And so you don't pick an attribution model that's right for your organization. Instead, you pick the attribution model that fits your use case, that fits the report that you're trying to build and the question that you're asking of the data in that moment. Now, to be clear, that does not mean you pick the attribution model that gives you the best results. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the one that fits the best use case. So let me give an example, because I always love using practical examples. So if you are so I'm going to use, just for this example, I'm going to use the visible W-shaped attribution model, which for those of you that don't know what it is, the visible W-shaped attribution model uses the milestones of first touch, lead creation, and opportunity creation. When you draw a W between them, that's why it's a W, it goes like that. So you have your W-shaped attribution model, and it goes from first touch all the way up to when the opportunity is created. Any touch points that take place after the opportunity is created do not get pulled into that attribution model. They don't get any value from that opportunity. So when would I use this? So the perfect use case for this is if I'm trying to run a report where I'm trying to understand how marketing has created opportunity value, not deals, but opportunity value, then I want to use the W-shaped model that Visible provides, because it's not going to give any attribution to the touch points that took place after the opportunity was created. If I'm trying to understand how marketing created opportunity value, it has to happen before the opportunity's been created. So that's a perfect use case for that one model, right? That works really well. Now, conversely, if I'm wanting to understand how marketing has influenced deals, closed-won opportunities, and I'm going to include any marketing touch points that took place between opportunity creation and opportunity closure, well, that model won't work for that use case. That wrench doesn't fit that bolt. It's a different size. So I have to use a different model. In that case, I would use the full path model. So you have different use cases and different questions that you ask of the reports and the data, and you use the attribution model that fits that use case. Now, you also get custom attribution models, and custom attribution models are your adjustable wrenches. You've got the wrenches that have the little sliders, right? That make the mouth of the wrench get wider or smaller. That's what you use for very specific custom use cases. You configure your custom model for the use case that you have in that moment. You run your reports and your data, you run your analysis, and then you can reset your custom model back to either what you have it normally as, or you can move on to your next custom use case and hit the slider on the wrench and make it fit whatever custom bolt we have for that use case. But you don't just pick one and stick with it, because if you do, you might end up like in that case of only wanting to count touch points that go up to the creation of the opportunity. You may end up over-indexing for a channel because that channel is actually taking place after the opportunity is created that you shouldn't be over-indexing for, right? You might be answering a question that you're not actually asking if you use the wrong attribution model.
So you said you shouldn't just pick one and roll with it. Based on my total limitations of analytics and attribution and everything, so totally putting myself on a level of vulnerability here, aren't models like Visible or Tableau or any other like attribution softwares that are designed to deploy a specific model and can incorporate customs, don't they have the limitations of only deploying like one at a time, like when you configure it? So how can you, they don't. Okay, I was going to say, so how can you not just pick one and go with it from like an organization, like from a scalability standpoint? If we're talking about, we're going to bring in attribution and we decided what we wanted to measure, but then down the road, we're like, oh, wait, we also want to find X, Y, and Z. We could reconfigure those to pop that data out as well. Again, just my own naiveness.
Yeah. No. So like, for example, and again, I'm just going to use Visible as an example, but when you buy Visible, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the box models. And depending on the tier you purchase, you get a custom model, and you can use them interchangeably at any time. As a matter of fact, okay, I can, if I'm building a report in Salesforce using Visible data, I can actually put all 6 attribution models into the same report and compare and contrast the results to see, how the different attribution models show different results based on the different ways that they slice and dice the data. So you have every attribution model at your disposal at any given time. I've even used them side by side to look at, because again, with the way that Visible does it, and I know that other platforms look at models differently, but the way that Visible does it is the models are kind of aligned to different parts of the funnel. So you've got like your U-shaped model, which is the very top of the funnel. You've got your W-shaped model, which goes all the way up until opportunity creation. You got your full path model that goes all the way through to when the deal is closed. So you can actually put these side by side. And I've actually found some cool, interesting things, like based on like channel A is actually more heavily indexed to the W-shaped model than full path or U-shaped, which means that that channel is more likely to take place somewhere in the middle of the funnel as opposed to at the top of the funnel or at the bottom of the funnel. So you can even see where specific channels or specific campaigns are actually more likely to impact the funnel based on by comparing the different attribution models side by side.
Okay, so this clearly identifies why we need to have either an in-house analyst or somebody like yourself, like on call and on staff for demand gen marketers who are wanting to figure out how to get all this. Because like I'm just like, oh, my own naiveness, and you just told me all these different things. I'm just like, okay, amazing. Like this just totally just connect the dots with why having an analyst, a specific role to help out marketers is so important.
Yeah, and I mean, the great thing about having an analyst, and I'm going to use, again, I love using examples. So I'm going to give an example of an anecdote from a client where I was their analyst. So their analyst was, outsourced to me. It was me. And I was their analyst for 5 years. And I can still tell you to this day that in Q1 of 2017, we should completely discount every single one of their lead creation metrics, because during Q1 of 2017, they had a hacking attempt. Somebody was trying to hack into their database, and they were doing it by filling out the free trial form, hoping to get access to the software so that they could create a backdoor and get access to the data. And so they had 12,000 free trial form submissions submitted in Q1 of 2017. And so if you're doing year over year comparisons or quarter over quarter comparisons, you obviously can't compare against that quarter because that quarter the data is flawed, right? So an analyst knows that because they build this reporting history, and they have a repository of old reports and old decks and old analysis that they've done. And it's also just in their brain, because once you have to remind somebody 35 times that, hey, Q1 of 2017, we can't compare against that because of this hacking attempt, it just gets stuck in your brain and you remember it. I still remember it to this day, that 2017's Q1 data is flawed for this organization. If you don't have a person in the organization who is dedicated to owning that reporting and analysis data, who's going to remember that? Who's going to know that those 12,000 form submissions weren't real and that we shouldn't compare that to a current quarter? Who's going to know that wait, no, we didn't just have a massive decrease in form fills. That was an outlier and due to hacking, and so we should just discount it. You have to have somebody in the organization that knows that stuff.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to get, yeah,
the analysis is completely flawed if somebody doesn't know that stuff.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to get the individuals who step in and was that's the benchmark. Every quarter we got to hit that benchmark. And as you don't ever hit it, they're going to be marketing is failing. What's going on? And then fire everybody, bring in new staff. So absolutely, to your point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and people do that all the time. People don't understand that these outliers shouldn't be our benchmarks. But if you don't have that analyst in place that, one, knows to look for those things, two, has that reporting history that's been created over years and years of rigorous analysis, or three, just forgets to look there, like if you don't have that person, like you're never gonna, like you're going to get it wrong. You're just going to. And again, it's not the fault of the people that are doing the analysis, because they're being asked to do something that maybe they're not good at. Maybe they just aren't interested in, right?
Such valuable points that you brought up just there. The last question that I have for our conversation, which I've been loving, by the way, totally like learning so much from you and nerding out. So I appreciate your time in this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. What is one thing that you could leave the audience with about things that you feel that demand gen marketers should understand about attribution, but don't, and why?
There's not one thing, there's going to be a couple. So number one is, you're probably more ready for it than you think. Most of the organizations, I do attribution readiness assessments, and most organizations are way more ready for it than they anticipate. They think that they've got to get their data to be pristine before they bolt on an attribution platform, when in reality, the attribution platform is actually going to help with that data cleanliness, and normalizing some of that data. So you don't have to, it's the concept of like, I know people that that they have somebody that they hire to come clean their house, but they clean the house before the cleaner gets there. And it's like, you don't have to clean the house before you hire the cleaner. Like just like you can bring the cleaner in to clean the house, right? And that's like kind of the concept with attribution. Like you can add attribution if your data isn't perfect. So like you're more ready than you think you are, number one. Number two, it's not as difficult as some of the it's not as difficult and flawed as some of the very, very loud voices on LinkedIn will tell you that it is. You can do a lot more with it than what a lot of people on LinkedIn are aware that you can do, like tracking podcasts. Also, like there's a lot of stuff out there that you can't track, likes, comments, shares, direct messages on LinkedIn with attribution, with software-based attribution, and you can. It's not easy. It requires work. It requires some additional software that's in place, but you can. And most folks don't even know that it's possible. And there's a lot of folks that tell you that it's not possible, but it is. So like it can do a lot more than most people think that it can. So you're more ready than you think. It's not as difficult and flawed as most people think. And then the last point that I'm going to say about marketing attribution is there's no perfect solution for reporting. There's not. Attribution is not a perfect solution. It does have flaws. But if your goal is perfection, you will never reach it because it's not possible. So instead of trying to wait for the perfect solution to come out, because there isn't one, incremental improvement. Strive for incremental improvement, which is adding attribution to your tech stack. Is it perfect? No. Then again, nothing is. Is it better than what you have now? If you're not using it, then 100% yes, it is better than what you have now. So you should be striving for better, not perfect.
I love those insights. I think another big reason why a lot of demand gen marketers don't want to start dabbling with attribution is because it's a little scary, at least, on my end. It almost seems like a separate beast that you have to, especially if you don't understand it. And to your point, like if you don't like it or if you don't want to, then having like, even if we contract somebody like yourself, like I feel like somebody on the inside should still help guide the conversations or should know how we're going to build it. And sometimes the knowledge is missing between that. And so you have to really trust the individual that you hire to fulfill it. But I think also, just the being scared about it and not knowing like how to manage it and maintain it is just scary for some demand gen marketers as well.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. It's scary for those reasons. It's also scary for other reasons too. And I'll touch on those other reasons too. But that's honestly part of the reason why I started Attributa, is because there's a lot of people out there that have, implemented an attribution platform once or twice, and they'll tell you all day, every day that they know how to do it and they know how to be successful with it. But if you've done something once or twice, you're not an expert. It means you're just barely scratching the surface, right? And so there aren't a lot of trustworthy attribution experts in the world because attribution is still so new. There just aren't that many people that have done it more than once or twice. And so I wanted to create an organization that's our primary focus so that we can build up that trust and we can build up that expertise. I mean, personally now, I've been doing this for 7 years, attribution. I'm upwards of something like 90 to 100 different instances of marketing attribution that I've worked in. So I've seen it work really well. I've also seen it work not very well, and I've seen it be completely broken. So that's ultimately, like, that's part of the reason why I created Attributa, is because I want to build an organization that has that trust, that has that expertise. Back to the scary part too, though, is, one of the scariest things that organizations have to start dealing with as part of like the change management of moving on to attribution is a completely new way of being measured. Traditionally you're measured based on MQLs and conversion rates and stuff like that. And now you're going to be measured based on your contribution to pipeline and bookings and sales. And that is terrifying because you now have like a much more serious number that you're kind of being held to and standard that you're being held to. And there's fear in being held accountable for metrics like that are dollars and cents. And there's not a lot of marketers that want to raise their hand and say, yeah, measure me based on revenue. Like there's not, there's a lot of marketers like myself that started in sales and said, I don't want to have a quota ever again. And now you're putting attribution in here and you're like, shit, am I going to have a quota again? That's not cool. And so it's scary to be held to a higher standard than something like MQLs. There's fear in that because like, what if my campaign generates zero revenue? If I go spend $1 million on a campaign and it generates zero revenue, like I might lose my job. So there's fear in additional standard that you're being held to, and a higher standard that you're being held to as a marketer versus just, the standard metrics of conversions and MQLs and the stuff that marketers are used to. That's a scary thing.
Yeah. Just over here snapping my fingers. I'm like, yep. So absolute like knowledge bombs going on in this podcast episode right now, like the fire emojis going on.
Yeah, but then again, at the same time, like imagine if you're a marketer and you run $1 million campaign and it generates like $50 million in revenue. Imagine the value that you add to that organization. Right there, like if you can legitimately go say that I ran $1 million campaign that generated $50 million in revenue, like how can you not use that in your annual review to get a promotion? Like, look at this.
Right.
I generated $50 million for the organization. Where's my piece of that pie? Like I'm getting promoted here, right? And if you're not getting promoted, that's going on your resume to get you, a promotion or at a bare minimum, a significant salary increase. So at the same time, while it's scary, it's also one of those things that if you are good and you can achieve those metrics, that is a feather in your cap. That is a 100% career-defining moment, that you can actually say these things. So it's scary, but it also like can add a lot of value to your career to be able to hold yourself to those standards and be able to measure yourself like that.
Yeah, that's also why I personally love being held accountable to revenue, because I can go in and be like, I did that. And that's just my own self-serving ego. I know it 100%, but I want to be able to show that like, hey, my strategy did this. And it just makes me feel good at the end of the day.
Hell yeah. We should all be celebrating that kind of stuff. That's not an ego. That's just celebrating achievements. That's like,
I'll recognize it. It's my ego though.
No, I love being able to celebrate those wins with clients where we're looking at something and it's like, yeah, that webinar, we ran that webinar and holy shit, this webinar just generated like $2.5 million in revenue over the last like 6 weeks. That's amazing. Like, let's do more of that. Those are the types of things I love seeing when we get somebody on attribution. And I mean, I've seen people get promoted because of the results that they've been able to prove with attribution. And that's just cool. I love that. Like, you know, that we all want to be rewarded for our good work. And it's been very difficult for marketers to prove the value that they bring, because like, well, what's the value of an MQL? Well, we can't quantify that, right? So how much value am I actually bringing to the organization? Well, now with attribution, you can prove the value that you're bringing to the organization. So
yeah. Mic drop, hands down. There you go. All right. Those are all the questions we have for the time that we have today. Drew, I've really appreciated this conversation. Thank you so much for taking time out to chat with me.
Oh, well, thank you so much for letting me come crash the party here on one of your episodes. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Where can people find you to learn more about Attributa or about you?
Yeah, our website is attributa.io. And I am not using my own marketing 101 here. I don't have an offer for you or a URL. Because quite frankly, like I'm not big enough to need attribution. I'm still a small company, so I don't need it yet. But yeah, attributa.io. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Andrew with Drew in parentheses Smith. Attributa is on LinkedIn. So just search for Attributa. We're the only company called Attributa, so it should be pretty easy to find us. And then yeah, that's where you can find us.
Amazing. Love it. Thank you so much again for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you, Janelle. Appreciate it.